India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is travelling to Italy to participate in the G7 Outreach Summit. In his departure statement, Prime Minister says, and I quote, "I'm travelling to Apulia region in Italy to participate in the G7 Outreach Summit on 14th June 2024. I'm glad that my first visit in the third consecutive term is to Italy for the G7 Summit. I warmly recall my visit to Italy for the G20 Summit in 2021. Prime Minister Meloni's two visits to India last year were instrumental in infusing momentum and depth in our bilateral agenda. We remain committed to consolidate the India-Italy strategic partnership and bolster cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and the Mediterranean regions. During the discussions at the outreach session, the focus would be on artificial intelligence, energy, Africa and the Mediterranean." He further says it will be an opportunity to bring greater synergy between the outcomes of the G20 summit held under India's presidency and the forthcoming G7 summit. I'm also looking forward to meeting other leaders participating in the summit. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has departed for the G7 summit in Italy on Thursday. In his outreach, Prime Minister will hold a bilateral meeting with Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and other world leaders. G7 is a grouping of the world's 7 most developed economies. It comprises Italy, Germany, Canada, France, the United States, the United Kingdom and Japan. And here's an exclusive report from DD India correspondent Amritpal Singh.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi departed for a day-long trip to Italy, where he'll be participating in the G7 summit, taking part in the outreach session where he shall touch upon issues like artificial intelligence, energy, greater cooperation with Africa and the Mediterranean. The Prime Minister could also raise the issue of cross-border terrorism and the need for the world to take a united stand against it. The Prime Minister would also hold bilateral meetings with, of course, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, on whose invitation the Prime Minister is visiting Italy, where he would review the entire gamut of the relationship and would want to work out the contours of how the relationship can be taken forward. The Prime Minister, interestingly, will meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, where he is expected to reiterate India's long-standing position of taking the course of talks and diplomacy to address the conflict and find the way out of the conflict rather than through military victory. The Prime Minister is expected to meet UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the French President Emmanuel Macron. Also, he would meet with the other partner countries from the African nations and use both his bilateral meetings and his intervention at the G7 to push the agenda of the global south and see that more synergy can be brought in between the outcomes of the G20 New Delhi Declaration and the communique at Borgo Egnazia here in Italy of the G7. With cameraman Shailendra Chauhan, this is Amritpal Singh in Apulia, Italy for DD India.
Okay, let's stay with the developments at the G7 summit. Meetings have begun in Apulia, Italy. Joining me now is Kate Fisher from Washington, D.C. for more on this and other stories from around the world. Kate, the deliberations in Italy could shape the global conflicts and economies in the days ahead.
Yes, you're right, Shubhendu. The leaders of the G7 democracies have begun this summit in Italy, but many of them are under a cloud back at home, and that could be making things more tricky as they negotiate. But they say they're determined to make a difference on the world stage as they seek to help Ukraine in its war against Russia and to counter China's economic ambitions. Heading into 2 days of talks, diplomats said that a deal had been agreed in principle on plans to issue $50 billion of loans for Ukraine using interests from Russian sovereign assets that were frozen after Moscow launched its invasion of its neighbour in 2022. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed the hope that the talks will lead to concrete and measurable results.
The message we want to convey is a G7 that, under the Italian presidency, wants to strengthen its dialogue with the nations of the Global South. We have done this because this land is historically a bridge between West and East. It is, let's say, a land of dialogue at the center of the Mediterranean Sea, of that Middle Sea that connects the two great maritime spaces of the globe, that is, the Atlantic on one side, the Indo-Pacific on the other.
Well, the G7 comprises the United States, Japan, Canada, Germany, France, Italy and the United Kingdom. The European Union also participates in the discussions.